Good morning, Warzone kids. It is a gorgeous day on the Trail to the Western Lands. It is only 20 degrees, but the sky is violet and blue and clear, and the roads are dry. And we can get in a lot of miles today on the Trail to the Western Land. We can walk today's miles, you and I, and that's all we can ever do. Warzone kids is my term for those of us like myself. I'm a child sex abuse survivor, and Warzone kids is my term for those of us whose childhoods was more like a hostile guerrilla war against our psyche, and less like the kind of supportive nursery where you can grow you a nice hothouse orchid. Everything, you get all your needs met and everything's all hunky-dory. Your war zone, you might be a child sex abuse survivor like I am. Your war zone might be emotional abuse. I had a lot of that. Psychological abuse, I had a lot of that. Physical abuse, not much of my experience. Might have been societal abuse or racial abuse. I'm a straight white man, Gen Xer from Oklahoma, and your experience is maybe wildly different than mine. You may have grown up in an actual war zone, like my favorite UFC fighter, Khamzat Chimaev, the Chechen fella, grew up in the 90s in Grozny, and I believe he lost his father in that war. But if you're a war zone kid like I am, you can probably identify with the way that I think of my own soul, my own psyche. I think of it like a Jenga tower. You know that game where you got a block of wood, it's made up of a lot of smaller blocks? And with each turn in that game, you slide out one of the blocks from where it goes and you put it up on top. And with each turn, the tower gets taller and more rickety and wobbly and more unstable. And at the end of the game, the tower falls down because that's how the game ends. But that's just where life begins for a lot of us Warzone kids, because by the time you get into adulthood, if you have a Warzone psyche, it's probably a lot like the Jenga tower toward the end of the game. It's a tall, shaky, rickety thing, ready to fall down. You can't stomp near it, don't touch it, don't breathe on it. Matter of fact, don't even look at it. You can spend your whole life just trying to keep that tower from falling down. And if you're a Warzone kid, you probably know what I'm talking about. Well, every end is a beginning, and every beginning is an end. Quote T.S. Eliot. And for me, in a lot of ways, the best part of my life didn't start till after my Jenga tower had fallen down several times. Because it's hard to get that Jenga tower back in shape while it's still standing up. You got to take those blocks one at a time off the top. You got to slide them back in. Trying to do that creates a great tendency for that Jenga tower to fall down. But after it fell down, you can just put the pieces right back. They're on the floor laying all around you. Just pick them up and put them back. Easy win. So this is part 2 of we're all high priests in a religion of one, related to the theme of how do we live. Pois boiton. That's your ancient Greek lesson for the day. I studied Greek philosophy in college, and that question guides Greek philosophy. Guides Plato anyway. Let's leave it at that. Guides Aristotle. How do we live? And part 1 yesterday was about the phrase, we're all high priests in a religion of one, which is about alienation. The alienation I feel as a Warzone kid from myself, from the cosmos, the Jenga tower of my own psyche, from the literal house that I grew up in, from the religious society I grew up immersed in, the broader society around me. My natural place in any society is out on the outskirts of town. Or maybe if I was an Athenian man in the classical era, first of all, I'd hate it. Second, I would leave the city of Athens and I'd go down to Piraeus, the port town. Port towns are notorious for being tolerant of outsiders because they're full of sailors and they're full of merchants, and they're full of people that can't quite fit in the regular city of Athens. So I might live out on the countryside with my goats and chickens, or I might live down in the Piraeus, but I would almost certainly not feel comfortable living in the middle of town. because I'd feel oppressed by the pressure to be a good Athenian man and to live in that way that was directed to me by my society. And this is part 2 of that. Because the idea of we're all high priests in a religion of one, meaning if you're a war zone kid and you're just alienated from the way of life of the people around you, if you can relate to that experience, you can find yourself adrift. And that can have a nihilistic feel to it. Nihilism, it's a word from philosophy. It means, but more than that, it's like a mood. Nihilism is like a mood-based stance toward the world. Like, I've been let down. I've been let down by the world. I was raised in a religion and I can't believe in it anymore. Matter of fact, I never could. I was 4 years old and I said the sinner's prayer, asked Jesus to come into my heart, be my personal Lord and Savior. And there weren't nothing happened. Now, it's very fashionable to throw contempt, to heap contempt on that world, on the world of born-again Christians, particularly if they're evangelical, particularly if they're from south of the Mason-Dixon line. But that's a folk religion, and it's due the same respect as is, Sikhs or, Hindus or Jewish folks or Muslims or anything else. No more, no less. And I felt very much betrayed and let down by that, and I went off on a quest to find what was the true way of living. I thought that it was just Christianity that it was impressed upon me. But what was impressed upon me really more deeply than that was the idea that there is a true way to live. And I could go find it. Maybe I could find it in the world of ancient Greece. Maybe I could find it in Catholicism. Maybe I can find it in Hinduism, in radical atheism, in Buddhism. Is one of these true? Well, I'm 51 years old. I practice Zen, which is, you have to kind of stretch it and bang on it, and do it violence to call it whether you call it a religion or philosophy. It's a way of life. It's a practice. It's a nomos, to use another Greek word. It's a tradition. It's a way of living. But the idea that we're all high priests in a religion of one, hold that in one hand, and in the other hand, hold the idea of nihilism, like a feeling of betrayal, that none of these things turn out to be true. I think there's a South Park cartoon where they postulated that maybe Jehovah's Witnesses were the true one. Right? I got nothing against, Jehovah's Witnesses. But it is a little bit funny to think of all the possible religions in the history of the world. That one would turn out to be true. So you can have a feeling of nihilism and being let down by the fact that in our modern age, in late, early 21st century United States, in the contemporary world, it is a difficult project to wrap your mind around any one specific way of life and believe in it. Now, you find a lot of people that are Catholic, or that belong to a, formal religious belief, that belong to a formal religion. Well, I grew up around devout people, and I was talking to someone the other day that said, he got into Christianity because he liked certain of the tenets and, liked socially what it did and whatnot. I understand that. But I can tell you, that's night and day from the Christians I grew up around. Because the born-again Christians I grew up around, they didn't care about none of that. It was true. They believed in God. They were Christians because they believed in God. And they believed in the redeeming power of Christ. And they believed in life across the Jordan River. They believed they were new creatures in Christ. the old things had passed away and all things had become new. They were Christians because they believed in God. That is a different proposition, Pilgrim, than being a Catholic because you like Mass and it's comforting and, you know, you're raised that way and you like fish on Fridays. And you're more or less grouchy about not having Latin Mass anymore. You know, there is a world of difference between that and believing in God, right? You can find this whether you're talking about a Muslim, a Jewish person, a Hindu, a Sikh, an animistic person from Mongolia, or whatever. There's a world of difference between believing in God or the gods, whatever you want to call them, and belonging to a religion. We're all high priests in a religion of one. Nihilism. The alienation of a war zone kid looking for how to live. Nihilism, that mood, can particularly, if you got some type of philosophical learning or some type of, what they'd call now as a kid, some type of college education where you went off and learned a bunch of hogwash. Well, one of the things you can learn is that there ain't no way to prove that any of these religions are truer than others. And if you get right down to it, there ain't really any way to scientifically prove that any one way of life is better than another way of life. You know, you look around the world, can't really prove it scientifically, whatever that might mean. And that's true fact. You can't. Well, not to the best of my knowledge. I've read a good deal in modern philosophy. And you go read your book one of Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's of the same view. You can't really believe in any of these things. They're all just things people believe. They're all just ways that people live. What's the true one? Well, you find yourself cast adrift and pulled toward a nihilistic frame of mind when you're looking at things that way. Disillusioned because you can't scientifically prove that Jehovah's Witness, I don't even know how you say it, Jehovah's Witnessism, Jehovah's Witnessing, Jehovah's Witnessery. I mean no disrespect to the religion, I just can't figure out how to make a word of it. You can be cast adrift in a sea of nihilism and disillusionment because you can't prove that that's right. Well, to me this has a lot in common with the way that people will often become disillusioned with politics because it doesn't work like how they thought it worked when they were 8. I understand this. I mean, it's a feature of being a human being. It's closely related to the nihilism that we just talked about. Well, if you grew up with a view of politics, whatever that was, whether it was here in the Soviet Union or Germany in the 30s, or wherever it was, the Assyrian Empire in the 2500s BC, wherever it was, you'd have the same experience. You would be told how the world worked, how politics worked, and then at some point you would have the opportunity to learn how it actually worked, and many people find that a disillusioning experience. Well, this guy does not. My attitude toward that for myself is, when I find out that politics does not work the way I thought it worked when I was 8, that ain't politics' fault. It's my fault for clinging on to an idea of the world that I developed when I was 8 years old. That's on me. There's almost nothing in the world that works like I thought it did when I was 8. Very little. Except for the one thing that matters, which is, how do I live? How do I live my life? That is a question that concerns the mind of an 8-year-old. And if you follow my recommendation, That is a question that will concern you every day of your life up to the last one, because the day after that don't matter. How do I live my life? That question will lead you away from the mood of nihilism. Let me put that a better way. That question led me away from the mood of nihilism. It does not matter to me, to that question, how do I live my life? It does not matter to me that I cannot prove scientifically that Jehovah's Witnessism is true and correct, and that there is no real, true world that lurks behind the world of appearances. I'm just using some philosophical type language to talk about it. Well, how do I live my life? How do I live my life? And here's what I love about Warzone Kids. Here's what I love about you. If you're watching this 12 minutes in or however long it is, you're who this is for. Because you care about this. If you're a Warzone Kid, I'll bet you, and you're watching this, I know for a fact, you share my concern with the question of how do I live my life? How do I, as a Warzone Kid, live with the psyche I have? I am motivated because the Jenga tower in my head, left as it is ain't going to do nothing but fall down. The Jenga tower in my head will not let me live my life in a peaceful way if I just leave it alone. As an adult, I live with borderline personality disorder. I'm a recovering addict and bulimic. The Jenga tower in my head is not compatible with eudaimonia. It's not compatible with human happiness. It is not compatible with a good human life in any way you care to define it. And I got the motivation to ask myself that question, how do I live? And I'm sharing this with you because if you're a Warzone Kid and you're watching this 17 minutes in, you share that motivation. We share that motivation. That's why you're watching this. That's why I'm talking to you. How do we live our life? We're all high priests in a religion of one. That might be the only tenet of my religion as a pilgrim on the trail to the Western Lands, is to ask myself that question every day. How do I live my life? What is a good life? And whatever the answers are, they lie on the path to the trail to the Western Lands where I learn and become who I am. The Western Lands, a place of peace and wholeness. That's where I'm headed, pilgrim. And it's a pilgrimage. I like that imagery because a pilgrimage ain't just about the destination. A pilgrimage is about the journey toward the destination. The Western Lands may well consist of nothing more than the path to the Western Lands. I do not know. All I know is it's a beautiful day on the trail to the Western Lands, pilgrim. Rosy-fingered dawn is out from under her blankets. The sky is blue. The clouds are rosy-fingered. And it's a beautiful day on the trail. We can get in a lot of miles today, pilgrim. Let's have a chat. We got a lot to talk about. Daylight's burning. Let's get a move on.